Welcome to the Point of Medicine podcast, brought to you by LearnNeuralTherapy.com. Doctors Ann Hill and Alana Gurvich team up to take a deep dive into the art and science of healing. This podcast explores cutting-edge approaches to the autonomic nervous system and its role in organizing fascia for optimal health. Each episode features conversations with leading clinicians who are pushing the boundaries of medicine, uncovering new insights, and transforming patient care. Join us as we bridge tradition and innovation to expand what's possible in modern healing. Just a reminder, this podcast is for educational and entertainment purposes only and not intended as medical advice. Please consult your healthcare provider before making any changes to your healthcare plan. Join us and let's jump into the next episode.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Point of Medicine podcast. We have with us today Lindsay Howson, and she is an LPC. And Lindsay specializes in treating people who have come from very traumatic backgrounds. So we are really excited to talk to her today. She refers patients for neural therapy and for other things, but we wanted to talk to her just about her experiences with trauma because, of course, as neural therapists, we're dealing with a lot of that. So yay, we're excited that you came today. Thank you.
Thank you, Lindsay, for joining us.
So honored and happy to be here. So thank you for having me.
Yeah. Can you start first by just telling us, this is a question we ask everybody, can you tell us just a little bit about yourself and how you got into treating patients, and tell us a little bit more about your practice too?
Sure. Yeah. So my practice is, I tell everybody I'm kind of a one-trick pony. So I only work with clients that have complex PTSD, and of that, the ones that have kind of were born into severe trauma. So they usually have at least 20 years at the start of life, and then often have another decade or two of severe trauma after that. So they're the ones that I treat are typically high drive, high pain tolerance, high levels of dissociation, and they often slip through the cracks of the medical and mental health care systems because they're super functional. They're often smiling and just energetic and really relying on their adrenaline and dissociation to get through. So those are my folks.
Great.
And
Cool.
can you tell us how you got into those being your folks?
Yeah, so I am one of them. So that just kind of, I think it was my own curiosity about how to help people like me who slip through systems and don't quite know exactly when you're kind of born into dissociation. You don't really know how to be an accurate historian of what you need help with. And then on top of that, a lot of people will just kind of be like, well, I don't know what to help you with. You seem fine. It's like, well, I don't know what to tell you my problem is. So I must be fine. So that I started off working actually with a lot of perpetrators of the types of abuse that I see often, and thinking if I can help the perpetrators, maybe I can help stop this problem. And that was a whole journey in and of itself. And then over time, after the first few years, transitioned to working solely with the victims and survivors.
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, can you tell us a little bit about, you are someone who has referred patients to me to get therapy. Can you talk a little bit about your experience and why you refer for that?
Yes, I refer them because it was so helpful for me. I think so trying to think back to before I started with the medical symptoms that I started noticing, I was like highly athletic, doing CrossFit 3 hours a day, working full time. And then in a matter of 6 weeks, I just face planted off a cliff and couldn't walk, couldn't eat or drink. It was just like, what is happening? So through this whole process of treatments, one of the treatments that one of the doctors tried on me, because I've done neural therapy with 3 doctors now, Dr. Hill being one of them. And it was the first time that I ever felt peace in my body, in my nervous system. I had never experienced that before. And I was just like, what is this? Like, this must be what I heard of in grad school when they said, take deep breaths and just let yourself float on the ocean. And I remember hearing stuff like that in grad school and just be like, what does that mean? So it's just neural therapy for me helped me to be able to feel peace and have nervous system response that I could work back towards and try to practice that level of calm in my body. And before that, there had just never been what I call like pre trauma normal to navigate back towards something. There never was a pre trauma piece. So it enabled me to be able to feel like distinguish what hunger was and what satiety was. I had never experienced that in my life. It was just very cut off from physical symptoms, which is how I got so sick in the first place. I didn't know that I was sick. So,
Yeah, I think I love that. I mean, it's kind of like it's interesting to think about. You can't really know what hot is until you know what cold is, you know?
yes, yes.
And just even that concept of not, growing up and not even understanding what does it feel like to be in a parasympathetic nervous state or not
Yeah,
nervous state, but parasympathetic state, you know?
yeah.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it was the weirdest experience. And I think it just gave me a lot of hope. And so now I've sent so many clients in for neural therapy, and they have very similar reports to give that it's like very similar experience to them if I didn't know that this is what hunger felt like. That's a big one. Hunger. Most of them don't know what hunger feels like. So they do things like what I call spreadsheet eating. They just rely on timers and spreadsheets to tell them what to eat and when because they have no idea what hungry and satiated feel like. Yeah, there's no intuition because the prevailing intuition was dissociating.
Wow.
I
What
don't think
other are there other sorry, are there other things too that you found that besides the hunger and satiety that like kind of shift for people?
Yes. So some of them don't, well, most of them actually don't have much of a sense of their body and space. So they're very klutzy. They're prone to bumping into things a lot, or they don't understand, like, they'll walk into door frames, especially if they're more flashbacky. But let's see, I'm trying to think. They can't tell when they're tired. They're so used to not being able to rest when they're tired that they don't feel it. And so usually they will blow 5 miles past to the point that they should rest and just kind of face plant. That's the only way that they can really go to sleep or quote unquote rest is when they're just like so exhausted that they just fall over. So neural therapy has also helped them be able to identify those early signs of, okay, this is what it means when my body needs to take a break.
Hmm.
you've been working with these people for 15 plus years, right? Like this is a population you know excessively well. Is there like buckets that you organize them in? Like this is this pattern, this is that pattern?
Yeah, for symptoms, like
Huh?
symptoms that they experience, yes. So, are you thinking of like flashbacks? Do you have an
I Yeah,
example? The
well, no,
type
because I've never
of
heard of
or
that. Like you said, if
yeah,
they're flashbacky or if they're klutzy, like there are
yes,
buckets that people present in that are like patterns that we should look for.
yes, yes, absolutely. So, big one, I have notes. A big one is so these folks are hard to assess because, like I said, they don't know how to describe their experience. They might be able to tell you some of their history, like bullet point, but they are likely not to show a lot of emotion. So that's one of the first things I look for is that they're not typically coming in crying and distraught. They're coming in and be like, "Oh yeah, so these are the things that happened," and just pretty flat. That's a big sign. If they have like pretty extensive trauma in their childhoods and they're saying it with a smile or just bullet pointing it, they have some pretty big dissociation going on. So that's one thing to look for. High pain tolerance for sure. So yeah, if you do labs on them and it looks like they should be having a hard time with fatigue or having a hard time with pain and they're like rating those things pretty low. That's another big one. Um, and then for flashbacks, so this is a hard one with these folks. I think in our culture, usually what people think of as flashbacks are kind of like what's in movies, like this visual. oftentimes on a battle scene, visual thing. And so maybe this veteran will be sitting at a table and there's a loud noise, and then all of a sudden it pans to the battle scene and they're kind of like back there, and all of a sudden they're under the table or something. What's more common than those visual flashbacks are the cognitive emotional flashbacks. So they'll report things like, I don't matter, some huge, like, I have no value, there's no point in living, high suicide risk for this group, because as their dissociation starts to come down, they've always been fine. And all of a sudden, they've got huge trauma stuff they've never felt. And all of a sudden, now they're trying to cope with all of that and they don't know how. And then another good question for them is, what is their eating like? So if they are doing kind of that spreadsheet eating, like they're always on some sort of diet. That's not like criteria in and of itself, but if there's that paired with a lot of trauma, that's a huge risk factor there. And then another one is that they often wind up in fields that are high crisis, high risk, because that's where they feel really calm. So, like, there was this really interesting study about Navy SEALs, and almost all of the people who were recruited for Navy SEALs were this group of people because they had the ability to just shut off their needs and go. Very mission driven. So, there's a lot of that, a lot of overworking. If you ask them, like, can you sit through a movie without getting up, like, I need a snack, I need some water, I'm gonna go to the bathroom. That is another big sign that they are too much in that trauma state to rest. And they've learned that resting is dangerous and hypervigilance is safe. So that's a big thing to help them, or just to even know how deep they are into that dissociative response and hypervigilance. Yeah.
Yeah, one of the things that we talk about in our classes too is you know, I never go out over a certain amount of procaine with a new patient because
Yeah.
I worry about if they haven't been in their parasympathetic state before, if they
Hmm.
do have this CPTSD, that, I don't want to drive that if suddenly they're too relaxed because that can do that. So,
Absolutely. Yeah. And I've had folks, so I always say trauma is primarily biological and secondarily emotional and psychological. And so the body's working so hard to keep them fine too, or keep them feeling fine in
mhm.
crisis states. And so, yes, with neural therapy and EMDR, like any biologically based type of treatment, there is a risk of like dropping them into sensation that they're not used to and do not have any tools to manage. Yeah.
And so one of the things we were talking about before when we were off air is one of your tools is EMDR, right?
Yeah.
And I think about people who dissociate a lot, it might be difficult for them to associate the memory, right? How can you explain
Yes.
how EMDR works? And then I'm just
Yeah.
wondering how we layer other tools like Procaine on top of it.
Yeah, absolutely. EMDR basically, so there's kind of like the standard protocol, and that is I think most of the research on that at this point is for simple trauma, which is single incident, usually as an adult and not interpersonal. So there's no betrayal, there's no themes of like, it's my fault, I'm a bad person, I don't matter. And so I think that like when I did that training years and years ago, it was like, oh, 10 sessions and done. It's like, what? Like PTSD, like cured 10 sessions. That's amazing. I will say that does not bear out with this population. So a lot of them don't have very many specific memories, especially at first. And so where I start with them is just getting to know what their environment is like and start to identify what their needs are and start to provide education about, like, let's look at what hungry looks like. And let's look at some of these broader themes of in EMDR, we call them negative cognitions, but those are really the emotional cognitive flashbacks that I mentioned. So that's usually what the emotion is attached to for these folks, is not necessarily the memory. It's usually what it means to them. So that theme of I don't matter, they might have had 10,000 literally experiences of people treating them in such ways from birth that showed them that they don't matter,
Mhm.
or that people are not safe, or that people will always leave. So that is where I start with them with EMDR. But the working memory taxation part of EMDR is the fourth phase. So we do a ton of, let's identify what's happening in your body. And we don't start with the body. We start with, like, tell me about the room you're in. And so we start kind of helping them be able to see the difference between a flashback and what's happening in the current, and start to be able to do a little bit of grounding, but not grounding in their body because that's too much. It's like grounding by telling me what you see. So it's like a level removed. Yeah. And then that starts to bring their dissociation and down enough to where we can assess for suicide risk and kind of put safety and support in place, grow their community support, because a lot of them don't have community. And the very first thing actually is, if they are still being abused, we have to get them in a safe situation first. Yeah. And then the bilateral or the memory taxation comes later. So
If we're going to utilize a therapy like neural therapy, when is the right time to utilize it? Because it doesn't seem like it would be initially when they're just discovering their trauma.
yeah, I would say it's a really good question. So most of my clients, I'm in regular, semi-regular communication with their doctors, whatever. Most of them have some sort of medical things going on. And so I like to be part of a team. So that is something I recommend, is like working, like being in touch with the therapist and just seeing, like, where are they in their ability to regulate things that come up, and just start really slow. Like Dr. Hill was saying, like low dose, just a few injections, see how it goes. Talk with their therapist, check in, like, how was their regulation? Because the patient also at that point might not be able to tell you. They might, because they'll often start going back to some of their old coping patterns, which are usually their addictions. So if you see an uptick in addictions, they've gone too far into being present. So it's kind of like pull back on dosage or frequency. But then you kind of reach this point in the treatment where everything is out there. And my approach at that point is like, well, you're in it now, so let's go in. So that's if they have the support and they have the education about what's happening, and they're not a high suicide risk, then go for it, because they're in it anyways. And neural therapy can help them get through that part, which is the most painful part, faster. Yeah.
What was the term that you used about the flash, or well, maybe forget that question. Cuz now it left my mind. The end of the day on a Fridays.
I understand. Yeah. It might have been something about emotional cognitive flashbacks.
Yeah, I'm wondering, like, the example that you used, like, can you give another example? Because I'm curious about that.
Let's see, which example? Do you remember the example I gave?
Well, you were talking about, like, it's not like a war scene, but
Yes. Okay. Yeah. So there's three types of flashbacks. There's visual, which is usually what you see in movies because it's common and it's easy to film something that looks like that. But the more common ones I have found are the cognitive emotional ones. Those are the ones that are themes of, like, what have I learned from this? So usually what that looks like is they're kind of going along in their baseline throughout their day, and then something triggers them. Usually they don't know what at first, and it's like this tsunami of darkness comes over them. that is when they're most at risk for suicidal impulses, because most of these folks were suicidal throughout their childhoods. In instances of acute abuse situations where they just wish that it would be over. And that is kind of how kids will experience that. But so that is when it will come. Those can last, the cognitive emotional ones can last weeks with, and so it feels like the new reality. So they can't distinguish this isn't actually happening right now. The people in your life actually don't think that you're without value, but they can't distinguish that. So those to me are the most like the hairiest, most dangerous kinds, partly because they last so long. Yeah. And then the third type is tactile. So that's when they will feel maybe like hands on them again, or you might see them like leaning off to the side and be like, why are you doing that? And like, there's nobody there pushing me.
Hmm.
Yeah. So, and the tactile ones usually last minutes or a couple hours at the most. Visual are usually like just minutes, and the emotional cognitive are long.
And could a patient have all three at the same time?
Yeah, they can. Yeah. Yeah. So that's where I usually just start, is helping them understand the difference between current reality and past reality, because it was a reality. It's just that it's over.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's interesting because, just like observing patients, like sometimes I've seen
Hmm.
like we had a model in one of our classes, and I was just like looking at how she was sitting, and it
Huh.
was so interesting because it was kind of like I think like what you're like I mean, I was like, I think this person's had a lot of trauma. We didn't really get her whole story, but I could see just from how she was sitting, it like almost seemed like that, like, she was kind of leaning off to the side, and she had kind of crossed her legs and was, like, sort of tucking them under her, and yeah, so that's interesting. This has been really fun to talk to you because I feel like I can understand a lot of this more now.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would imagine that it with naturopathic physicians that you guys see are probably encountering people who've never talked to anybody about their experiences before, or they've talked to people and had really bad experiences sharing, because they're
Yeah,
labeled
lots
as
of
trauma.
gaslighting.
Yes, gaslighting and trauma dumping labels, and also just like, "That was so long ago. Why aren't you better?" Yeah, so I think you guys are in such a unique position. It's amazing.
It is, the medical system, especially right now, is very tricky. Like nobody
Yeah.
has time. And that is one of
Yes.
the things that I think most of us do have time, at least more time
Yes.
than our conventional colleagues. And so I think patients lean in on that and trust that. And I feel like knowing our resources and knowing that people like you exist who are better equipped to help them navigate the, torrential downpour of their mental emotional state is
Yeah.
very helpful because I think a team is key,
Yeah.
you know?
I think so too. I have loved working as teams with folks, and I feel like they do so much better. It's kind of like, for most of them, the first time that they've had any sort of community where they feel buy-in, like all of these professionals want to help them. They want to help them heal. They believe them. That's a first for most of them. So, yeah, it's pretty incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Are there any other modalities that you lean into that you find helpful for these populations?
Yeah. So I like to do, I'm just starting to do more training in IFS. That's the internal family systems. So a lot of these folks I always think of trauma, especially in early childhood, just kind of fragmenting people. And so it's kind of different parts of people are just stuck in different compartments. And it's not somebody working as like an integrated self. It's kind of like one part is forward running the show. And so often these kind of little kid parts will get stuck and they never develop into, an integrated part of the person. So I love IFS. is probably the most compassionate and non-pathologizing type of therapy for this type of trauma. It's really coming from a place of like, whatever your symptom is, there's wisdom there. Let's lean into it and see what's happening there, why that's needed. And so there's no pathologizing of addiction. It's like, well, the addiction's doing something. Let's look into it. What is it doing? So that's a favorite. And I try to get all of them into medical care, usually with naturopathic physicians as early as possible. Sometimes that takes convincing because they don't think anything's wrong. But I'm like, I don't want you to be an ACEs statistic. So let's just do some preventative stuff and just see like, how's digestion? How's sleep? Like, let's just do a big overhaul. And let's see, and then EMDR. I think those are my main favorites, and just a ton of education about like what symptoms are and also the different types of abuse that they've been through, putting a name to that, because most of them think it wasn't a big deal because of having been gaslit their whole lives by culture and perpetrators. So yeah.
What inspires you the most about medicine nowadays and what you're like with what you're doing? You're like, oh no.
Gosh, inspires me the most with my clients or for myself.
What makes you keep running and ticking and doing what you're doing?
Yeah. So I think at this point, just seeing people get like from a place where most of them have never experienced happiness, they have kind of this shadow happy that's not really happy. And so seeing time and time again them finally kind of break through the clouds and be like, oh my gosh, I never believed you that I could feel this, but this must be what happiness feels like. And be able to have beautiful relationships, be able to eat normally, have good relationships with their bodies, full nutrition for the first time. That just I don't think I can ever get used to that, especially knowing what the darkness is where they come from. That's just amazing to see them burst through. And then this is the coolest thing too, is that I've been able to see just the ripple effects in their communities of when people who know them see them get healthy in every way, then they're like, what is happening? I want in on that. And so then they go to therapy and doctors, and it just kind of, them working on themselves changes their communities. So it's pretty incredible. I think a lot of them feel selfish sometimes often for getting help finally. And so I try to remind them that they're actually affecting a lot of change in themselves and how they parent and how they are able to spot kids being abused when they might not have, and be able to step in and help those kids too. So it's really just amazing to see the wider impact um and just see them have a chance. Yeah, and not become ACEs statistics.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's just heartbreaking. Yeah. Yeah.
Cool. Well, where can people find you?
I am working on a website, but it is not up. So I'm just on Psychology Today right now.
See.
Yeah. Yeah. Just on Psychology Today.
Okay.
We are, first of all, so grateful for the work that you do. I mean,
Oh,
it's
same.
so important and so difficult. And so I feel like lucky to know that you are available and around. And also,
Thank
thank
you.
you for giving us your time and explaining us how we can marry what you do with what we do, and how we can get patients just living and being present in their lives again, which is just a gift to watch.
It is. It really is. And I mean, allopathic physicians are what saved my life. So thank you both for everything that you do. Whenever I have these clients who are like, who should I see? I'm like, these allopathic physicians are fantastic. I highly recommend starting there. Yeah.
Thank you, Lindsay. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. It's an honor.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us today. If you like the episode, please like and subscribe to our channel and review us on your podcast players. Also, if you think this episode is helpful to some of your friends or colleagues, please share it widely. If you are curious about learning about neural therapy or other injection techniques, check out our courses on learnneuraltherapy.com. We'll see you next month for our next installment of the Point of Medicine podcast.